Hey, what are you doing on Saturday, May 4th? Do you want to hang out? Because I'm giving this workshop in my studio in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and I would love for you to come. Longtime listeners may remember I got the studio a little over 6 months ago. I've been getting it together, recording podcasts there, doing my live stream classes and my teacher's class. But now I'm ready, and I'm offering my first public workshop. Maybe we've never met before. Maybe you've listened to the show. You're curious to see if I'm actually for real. Maybe you'd like to learn about the practice approach that I am teaching. Or maybe we've met before. Maybe we're longtime friends, and it would be great to catch up. Whoever you are, I would love to see you in person and be able to look at you in your eyes, talk to you face to face. I'm very much looking forward to it. It's going to be special, and you're invited. Saturday, May 4th in Allentown, Pennsylvania. You can find out about it at jbrownyoga.com. All right, I just hit the button, and you hit the button, and here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name's Jay Brown. How are you? How's it going? Hope this is finding you in an okay moment. A lot happened this week. Did you see the article in the New York Times about the racket that is the Core Power Yoga Teacher Training Program, which was published 2 weeks after my blog post on reimagining yoga teacher training? Thanks to everybody who sent me the link. Also, did you hear? The Iyengar Association not only decertified Manuso Manis, but then at their big convention got up and apologized to victims and stated their clear intention and plans to make sure that there are processes put forth that would ensure such things do not happen again. It's very significant. They finally did it. One of the lineage traditions finally publicly acknowledged and decided to try to move forward in a constructive way. I think all my Ashtanga friends, Sharat, should take notice, and we should all just take heed. The paradigm is shifting drastically underneath our feet, my friends. But I got to be honest with you. I don't really feel much up to tackling any of it this week. Frankly, this is a very particular moment for me. I am recording this 2 days before it will post on April 15th, which is the day that my mother died 30 years ago. And many of you who know me have heard me talk about that. It's a big part of me and my yoga. And I feel it every year, right at this time. But in the last few years, it seemed like it had lessened. This year, it seems to be hitting me very hard. It's just amazing how much our traumas live in us. And it can really throw me. It really unsettles me, and I feel very fragile. So I've been taking care and holding my girls close. And maybe I'll say a little bit more about it on the other side. But really, I just don't really want to get into much is what I'm trying to say. And I don't need to, because I have this excellent conversation to share with you that I had with Greg Lehman. And Greg is a physio out of Canada we have a mutual friend in one of the best people on the planet. Her name is Terry Tater. Shout out to my friend Terry. She is the one who got me in touch with Greg because she knows that I've been really wanting to learn more about the science of pain and these new ideas about our bodies. You've all been hearing me go on and on about biopsychosocial and la la la. I think it's because it's something that I really want to learn more about. I'm not really a science-oriented person. It's very much out of my comfort zone, this conversation with Greg. But one of the things I wanted when I started this show was not just to document stuff and meet people, but learn about things that I am interested in. So today's talk with Greg is the beginning of the next few episodes, which are all along these lines, looking into neuroscience and strategies for pain and just trying to understand this incredible system that is what I call my body and how it relates to me and how what I'm doing in yoga practice would be serving it or not serving it. So Greg's going to kick us off today, and I'm very excited for you to hear it. Before we do, I mentioned that I've been holding my daughters close, and maybe you remember a few weeks ago I told you about how I took my eldest daughter to get her ears pierced. Well, she has now healed up enough and she can change her earrings. And she put on the earrings that I got her from today's sponsor, Ana Luisa Jewelry. And I had mixed feelings seeing her with those earrings on. On the one hand, I have anxiety over how quickly she's growing up. On the other hand, I was overwhelmed by the beauty of seeing her come into herself and become the person that she is becoming. Well, one thing I don't have any mixed feelings about is Ana Luisa Jewelry because it's a very reliable source. I don't know if you know this, but jewelry business is terrible for the environment. And that's why Ana Luisa Jewelry uses 100% recycled gold in all their products. And also, what I like about Ana Luisa is they cut out the middlemen. They're selling direct to you, so the prices are much lower, even though the quality is just as good. And the good news is, as a listener of the show, you can get 10% off by going to analuisa.com/jbrown. That's 10% off if you go to analuisa.com/jbrown. Get your jewelry there. Also, I am going to be out and about a bit. I've got some dates. Maybe you want to come see me. I am going to be in Allentown, Pennsylvania, May 4th. I am going to be in Australia, May 25th through June 2nd. 3 different places, Sydney, Gold Coast, and Melbourne. That's Australia, May 25th through June 2nd. I'm also going to be in Rhinebeck, New York at the Omega Institute, June 17th through 21st. And at the Feathered Pipe in Helena, Montana, August 17th through 24th. You can find out about those gigs and all of my stuff at jbrownyoga.com. Let me mention to you about next week. I know I usually wait to the other side, but there's a really special thing happening next week. And just in case some of you don't listen all the way through, I know not everybody listens all the way through to the other side. I just don't want you to miss out on this. Next week, Peter Blackaby and Bernie Clark are going to be here at the same time. Like, they basically just talk to each other most of it. That's not true, actually. You know me. I always stick my 2 cents in. But it's an incredible conversation, and it's a lovely follow-up to today's. So listen to today's, but then next week also, Peter and Bernie will be here, just so you know. All right. I think that's going to be fine. As I said, I will be touching base with you on the other side if you want to stick around. But I think that's going to be it. I think we should get to it and listen to this conversation I had with Greg Lehman. Hello, is this Greg?
Yes.
Hey, Greg.
How's it going?
It's going okay, man. How are you?
Good.
Thanks for this, man. I know our mutual friend Terry told me you're in the middle of a move. I know I've got 2 young daughters, age 9 and 4 currently, and we just made a move a year and a half ago. I know how stressful that can be, so I really appreciate you giving me some of your time, man.
Yeah, no worries.
How's it going? Did you make the move yet? Did it happen already? Or?
Oh yeah, we're here.
All right.
We're just renovating and all that stuff now.
All right, cool. Well, how's this day been going for you? What time is it there? You're earlier than me, are you?
It's 2 here.
All right, we're on the same time. What's been going on in your day so far?
It's just snowing here, so I'm shoveling the driveway and all that stuff.
Okay.
I had today off.
All right. Well, I really, again, appreciate the time. Terry also sent me your Recovery Strategies for Pain guidebook a little while back.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a pretty valuable resource. I really appreciated it. And, you know, we don't know each other at all so much. And I don't know, you don't run so much in the yoga circles, do you?
Like not intentionally. But sometimes I've taught a lot of yoga teachers.
Yeah.
There's a group that
isn't Jules Mitchell, isn't she someone that studied with you?
Yeah, and I've gone down to her teacher training and taught her.
Okay. That's right. That's where I heard your name from someone else, not Terry.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, I get it. Well, because I've had a couple other people on who are sort of like pain science kind of people, like Neil Pearson and Shelley Prosco. I don't know if you know them. And
yeah, I know both, yeah.
Yeah, and they're sort of like, I don't know, the folks I've had on, and I've kind of been going through this whole process myself. I've been like a therapeutically oriented yoga teacher for the last, 15 plus years. And, honestly, some stuff that I thought I was doing, I wasn't really what I thought it was. And frankly, more importantly, like I have pain issues in my own body that I've had to reckon with. And in that process, this whole shift from a postural, structural, biomechanical idea about my body to a more biopsychosocial model of my body has been sort of fundamental.
Oh, good.
And also just kind of hard to get my mind around. Like it challenges like a lot of these deeply ingrained ideas that we have. And so that's what I was sort of hoping to talk to you about, hoping to flesh out some of these ideas and make them clear if we can.
Yeah, let's do it.
I know. How did you get to that? Because you've got a bunch of different trainings. I see you've got like chiropractic work, physiotherapist work. So how do you go from those modalities aren't necessarily all rooted in biopsychosocial, are they? You come from the other world as well, right?
Yeah, I still think biomechanics are important, and I still do biomechanic research. That's what I enjoy researching the most, to be honest. But even though I have a master's in biomechanics, and this is 20 years ago, we really still, we knew then that it was all biopsychosocial. So I didn't really have a lot of too much deconstructing to do. I was introduced to the concepts pretty early, and I was able to see how they all fit together. Like, biomechanics are still important. What I really argue for is that we're looking at it, we're looking at the importance of biomechanics in the wrong way. Mm-hmm. We have too many biomechanical fallacies.
I think that's an interesting distinction, because biomechanical doesn't have to be in opposition to biopsychosocial. I guess what I'm referring to is that when I say biomechanical model, I'm referring to kind of like this sort of idea that we have about our bodies being these machines that break down and then we have to fix, and the idea of tissue damage, meaning pain, which we know now is not true, and that kind of stuff. Like there's a different way of understanding my own body.
Yeah, and there's a different way of understanding the biomechanics.
Right. So that's interesting. So how did you get to that? Like, through your training, or what led you to this pursuit of these kinds of ideas in your work? Because not everybody who's a physiotherapist is on board necessarily, right?
Oh, the majority aren't on board. Right. I would say it started because good biomechanists were challenging other biomechanists at the time. That was one thing. So right away, you could see that biomechanics challenges a lot of the biomechanical beliefs. I mean, I remember writing in 1998, and you can find this on the BiomechL listserv. It's like this old biomechanics, I don't know what they would talk group, I guess. And I wrote a question about Yanda. You know Vladimir Yanda, the lower cross syndrome idea? It's like your glutes are weak, your spine is tight, your hip flexors are tight, your abs are weak and long, and your glutes are inhibited. And so the theory was, you lengthen your hip flexors and strengthen your glutes, and it'll change your posture. And I wrote, people still argue that stuff. And I remember asking that question to this biomechanics group 20 years ago, and the majority of the responses were, the body doesn't work that way. You can't lengthen a hip flexor and turn on some other muscle to change your posture like that. So even the biomechanical stuff got challenged. And then there were researchers at the time who were good occupational biomechanists saying, we can't just change the loads and the forces on people. We have to, look at the psychosocial factors too.
So there's always been the thread of the idea, but even to this day, there's this idea of, if you have back pain, you have to strengthen your abdominal muscles or something like that.
Yeah, those are the postural ideas that you're going to somehow change your posture, which really has very limited support and probably more support, against the idea that you can change posture like that. It's not that strengthening would be bad, and it's not that it won't be helpful either. That doing those exercises might help people. It'll just help for some other reason.
Right. See, that's what I've been getting to. I'm talking someone like Peter Blackaby. He's all talking about neural mapping and stuff like that.
Sure, that's a possibility. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess why do you think it is then that if it's the case what you're saying, which is certainly be true, if that's what all the science is coming to, and there's always been people kind of saying this, how come we're still so locked into these other ideas? How come so few people see it? Or why is it so hard for me to have to get my way to it?
I mean, it depends specifically, what we're talking about, but
yeah,
I think a lot of it is because it's still taught in the schools, and so it just still keeps getting promoted to when people are young and they're learning. And I don't know why it's still taught. I mean, it probably depends on the school system what they're taught, but and it's not like it's the old people in the profession that keep promoting the myths. There's a lot of youngish people who are on Instagram and have influence, and they put out ideas that they say it's new. That's the irony. But these ideas are 40 years old. Right. Stretching your QL to alter, scoliosis and things like that. I just saw that one. That's ridiculous.
But you see, that's the thing. Doctors, and I guess the biggest one, to this day, when I say this to people in yoga classes all the time, because I teach this simpler, slower kind of practice, a lot of it's around safety in the yoga world these days sometimes. And so when I say to somebody, there's no correlation between tissue damage and pain, they look at me like I'm crazy. But that is an established thing, right? But doctors when you go see a doctor, they're not operating from that assumption. They're operating from the assumption that it does.
I mean, that statement has more truth to it with acute injuries. Okay. So it's not wholly false, and it's not that tissue changes like osteoarthritis, things like that, aren't a little bit relevant. They predispose one to pain, you could say, but the total magnitude, how bad it is, isn't really explained by how much change there is. It's like the kernel, and then, it's a spark, but then we fan that flame with all the other sensitizers in your life. And that's where to me, it's like the bio is important, and then the psychosocial is like your response to that biological, or that's not the best word, but that whatever pain you feel, and the psychosocial fan that sensitivity.
Right. I think that's right. That's certainly been what I've been experiencing. But it is interesting that, if somebody takes an MRI or something, I read this in something I think you wrote, that if someone does a scan and they find a tear and they're going to attribute pain to that, you can find another person who has just as bad or not more of a tear that doesn't have pain.
Yeah. And so it's not destiny. That's the idea. Stress is not destiny, but it's not wholly irrelevant. That's the thing.
That's
and
right.
So when you're working with someone, to me, you assume it's relevant. So you start addressing that, but then you expand, the options of helping someone. That's what the biopsychosocial does for me. I mean, start thinking about other things, and there's other things you can do too.
I know. I think, again, for me, I have like chronic inflammation pain in my body, and it does localize in like my hip. And, I went to get an x-ray and they didn't see anything in the bones, and I haven't had more tests done, but that pain I am able to like manage. I have been managing it for a long time, and I can get it to go away sometimes. And I know things that I can do to address it if it flares up. And I have been able to identify like a whole range of factors as to like what seems to like aggravate it and bring it about. And a lot of them are not like, oh, I did this physically and that's why. It's often, like you're saying, this other aspects of just like my stress levels and like if I sleep enough and like all kinds of other things.
Yeah, for sure. That's the idea. Just think more than just the tissue.
Right. And then I guess the other side of it, though, is there are these folks out there, and there are definitely a lot of yoga folks, because there's been a lot of pretty drastic changes in the yoga world where all along, when I first got into it, it was all gurus who you just did whatever they told you to do. Yeah. Now everybody's questioning that, and a lot of people have turned to biomechanics as well as like other movement modalities, a lot of somatic movement modalities. And sometimes I do still feel like there's this idea of you use, like what you were saying, you use poses to target certain muscle groups to tone up the body. And more I've really come to question whether that's really true. Can we, like, I had this debate recently with Bernie Clark and about, can you target muscle groups, and what does that actually mean, and what does that actually do in terms of what it means to strengthen a body or create stability in a body?
You you can, like, a lot of the research I used to do was with EMG. So those were I have about 10 to 15 publications looking at targeting, muscle groups and stuff like that.
I'm sorry, what's EMG?
Oh, sorry, like the excitation of a muscle, like that, the electrical activity in a muscle.
So is that when you like put probes on somebody and have them do stuff and measure what happens in their muscles? Yeah,
exactly. So like a lot of the work I did was on stability balls, because they were so popular at the time, and people thought, training on an unstable surface was so much superior than training on the floor, and that's how you need to get a good core workout or whatever it was. It'll train the small muscle. So we have all these ideas in biomechanics, and really, what we found doesn't matter, but like doing a curl up on the floor or a curl up on a Swiss ball isn't really any worse or better. But like in terms of targeting muscles, like there are exercises you can choose to certainly, work certain muscles a little bit more. Like, but we do function as a unit. So you couldn't, if you do a leg raise, lying on your stomach, you couldn't like turn off your hamstrings and just fire your glutes, or vice versa. You couldn't, like, people say, oh, don't let your back muscles fire, when you lift your leg, or else you'll cause bad spinal compression, or whatever people say. I mean, those things, you can't do that. The whole thing will work as a unit. You could preferentially say, I'm going to co-contract my glutes and really try to get more glute activity. You can do little things like that, but that's what I mean about the biomechanics. There's so many ideas out here that aren't supported. Like, what did I write before about some yoga stuff? It was some article telling people not to do like spinal flexion because it'll lengthen the ligaments in the SI joint and you'll become unstable. Like, that's such a common theory, right? If you do lots of yoga, you'll become unstable. Mm-hmm. Right? Would you agree that idea is out there? I don't want to misrepresent.
No, anyway. I've heard it. I sometimes it's this thing of you don't have forward flexion of the spine because it's like it's hurting your spine.
Yeah.
And I think that's a ridiculous idea in my experience. And, some of it is rooted in something that actually ended up being the issue for me, where there's this idea of like maintaining axial extension like all the time.
Yeah.
And I did that, and I trained myself to hold my body in like a state of axial. And that's my issue now. I have like too much extension. I'm like, you can create a pattern with that idea of like a straighter spine equals more stable. I actually argued that with a doctor on this show, Dr. Lauren Fishman, who kind of comes from this old school younger idea where there's this idea of like keeping the spine straight means more strong or stable. And I haven't found that to be true. In fact, that trying to keep my spine straight is something that ended up causing me pain, I think.
That's something I write and research and talk a lot about. The whole idea of the neutral spine being stronger and better, it's not that well supported. It's the idea that if you continually flex the spine, the discs will delaminate and they'll herniate. And most of that research is, done on cadaver models of animals in loading situations like 5,000 or 10,000 flexion loads on the disc over a 24-hour period. It's just, one, the tissue's dead. Two, you don't do those things, so that you could challenge that. And some of the other research is they're biomechanical models where if you flex the spine and load it, they'll measure the loads on the spine. And, and surprisingly, those models are inconsistent. Just because you flex the spine and load it doesn't mean that there's more stress on the back. So some researchers would say that there's less so. And then epidemiologically, we don't really have any research that shows that if you bend your spine a lot, you're more likely to have pain or injury. It's pretty amazing, but it's such a commonly accepted wisdom.
Well, it seems strange to me because then it's sort of like every time I reach down to pick something up, I just hurt my spine. That doesn't purport with my experience of a human body.
Yeah, sorry.
Go. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, like, no one's going to say, like, if you just bend a couple times. The argument is under heavy loads or if you bend a lot, that there'll be this accumulation of damage.
And what does bend a lot mean? Like, how many times do I have to bend over?
Like this could be like, it would be an accumulation throughout your day. Like if you're always sitting flexed, if you then choose and go on the rowing machine and then you do an hour and a half yoga practice and then you have some other activity, it's like you sleep in the fetal position. It's the idea of an accumulation. And why those ideas persist is because you're going to have people who are in pain when they flex their back, and when they avoid flexion for a bit, they'll feel better because they're always flexing their back and it hurts, so they stop doing it. So it's not unreasonable. But then what happens is people then draw this, theory or principle that regular spine flexion is bad for the spine, when in fact you just stop doing the thing that hurts. Great, it felt better, but now you can go back to flexing again if you want to. We make too many principles.
No
shit.
And I think that's an important point because I know that there are times when if someone is in some acute pain or there is an injury, it might be warranted not to have flexion. There might be times where you would be protecting in a sense,
totally
for good reason.
Yeah,
but not necessarily forever. Right?
No, and not as a general principle. And you're a good example where you held your spine in neutral and didn't flex, and that hurt. And that doesn't prove that flexion is good for everyone, like that everyone should be flexed all the time. It just says, if something hurts, then change it. Mm-hmm. Like, that's why I'm like what's called a movement optimist, meaning there's lots of different ways to move your body. Explore all of them and stop making up rules about how the spine should move, or any tissue. Yeah.
Well, you just said something about neutral spine, and I don't know that I was keeping myself in what I think of now as like neutral spine. That's something I just talked about with Bernie Clark. He's like a kind of science-oriented yin yoga guy, And to me, what I was doing was axial I was like working hard to keep my spine, like to undo curves in my spine. But I think of neutral spine more as where there is a healthy amount of those curves and I'm not like making an effort to straighten it. What do you mean when you say neutral spine?
So neutral is that natural lordosis that most of us have, right? That's a neutral, and it's a zone. Really, it means like stay in, like just don't go into lots of flexion. That's neutral. It is the zone that you have. So
like don't hunch too much. Is that what we're saying?
That's more neutral, because it's actually impossible. To me, if you look at the literature, it's actually technically impossible to stay in neutral for most people's activities. Mm-hmm. If you squat or do anything where your thighs get parallel to the ground, your spine's probably flexing at least half of its max, if not more, even when it looks like it's in neutral. So that's my other critique of the spinal flexion concern. Mm-hmm. There's that in what I really find interesting, especially for yoga folks, is like, again, that idea of lengthening a ligament. There isn't really a plausible mechanism or any research at all that we can actually lengthen ligaments or tendons. I know that
no, that's not crazy to me at all. I've always saying to people, there's nothing in your knee that wants to stretch. Like these are like connectors. They're not things that we want to pull. That's what I did. I pulled my body apart because there was this sort of idea of flexibility being a goal, or like, as my friend Leslie Kaminoff calls it, the unbridled pursuit of unlimited flexibility. And that led to me just kind of really pulling myself apart, and I've had to like kind of knit myself back together again.
Well, I would say even when you got more flexible, you weren't changing the connective tissues, meaning you weren't lengthening tendons or ligaments or fascia or anything like that. That the changes were predominantly nervous system and muscle. Because if you like look at it this way, when you strength train a tendon, do you know what happens to the tendon? Like if you just do strength exercises?
No. What do you mean by like lifting weights and stuff? Is that what you mean?
Lifting weights or sprinting or
like pull-ups, because I started doing pull-ups for the first time in my life.
Calf raises, any isometric poses that you might do in yoga, like that's a strength. And so the tendon undergoes strain, meaning it gets pulled upon. And the way the tendon reacts slowly over time is to actually get thicker and stronger and stiffer. So you pull on the tendon and it responds by getting stiffer, and a little bit more efficient. And so when you stretch, like a passive stretch, you're actually pulling on the tendon as well. It's the same type of force that the tendon feels. And so it doesn't make sense that the tendon will actually lengthen and get less stiff. The way we respond to tension, like getting pulled on a tissue, is to get stiffer. Like another example is if you tear your ankle ligaments, right? They've done this in rabbits and stuff like that, poor rabbits. But they damage the ligament, and then to make it heal, you load it by pulling on that ligament, which is a stretch. And it's an acute stretch, and then what happens over time is the tendon gets thicker and stronger. So it's quite odd. People think that's stretching, and they'll knock yoga for this. That end range movements actually make you looser in terms of your connective tissue, and we don't actually have any evidence, or when you look at the way the biology works, or any like plausible reasoning to think that would occur. I don't doubt that people get more range of motion, but they're not actually loosening up their connective tissue. I don't know if that made sense.
I think so. You talk in a technical language that I don't always completely understand. But what I would say is, like, it's interesting because for myself, I'm never really taking my body like as far as I can in things anymore. Like I like the idea of an end range for me had to be pulled way back, because I feel that if I do that, if I were to take my body to certain places in movement, then it absolutely aggravates, and I end up having pain. And by not taking my body into like farther ranges, I do feel that it's the word that comes to mind is solidified or feels more stable, and I don't have pain.
but it means a conscious effort for me. That I don't think that's true for everybody. Just for me, that I have too much mobility or something. So limiting the ranges of my mobility has been part of kind of having more stability or something.
Sure, and I just wouldn't even use the language like that. I don't think you're stable. I don't think you're unstable before. I think you just found movements that hurt, right? End range, and you stopped doing them. Like, I think it's as simple as that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Because you're going to find people who have some sensitivity and they love going to end range. That's like their relief. You know, so they're.
But I think, but going but I don't know. But what I've certainly experienced is that pushing hard on your body again and again and again sensitized me to pain.
Totally. It's because you were just doing the things that aggravated you too much.
Yeah.
Right. But it doesn't mean that you were unstable or the range of motion was the problem. Like like that we should have a principle that we shouldn't stretch and go to end range. It's just you hurt when you did it.
See, I like that. See, that's the optimism. That's the movement optimism. And I get that a lot from my friend Amy Matthews. And what she talks about a lot is you want to have the full range of movement possibility. Those are the words she likes to use. And that's sort of like a definition of like a healthy state in a way. And it has to not just do with ranges of motion, but how you move through the world, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
Wow. So, all right. So I guess what I'm trying to get to now is where does I'm trying to understand better where the biomechanical and the psychosocial come together, because, you know, for instance, in this process of addressing my own pain issues, I've been mentioning this a million times, that I started doing pull-ups because I heard someone talk about how there's no pulling action in yoga. And I was like, that's true. I can't think of anywhere in yoga where I do like a pulling action. So I got myself a pull-up bar and I do pull, I don't like hard, just when I want to, you know, 5 at a time, not like hardcore, but I definitely felt an effect of that. And I had this image in my mind of like engaging these muscle groups around my spine and how that was what was strengthening it. But then I talked to somebody who was talking about neural patterning, and this idea that I had about using these new muscle groups didn't seem to be true like I thought it was. So I'm sort of trying to understand, like, when I do a pull-up, and then I feel like my spine feels, you're saying it never was not sturdy, but it has a sensation of like nerve pain, you know? And then that goes away. In terms of strengthening muscles to address pain, I don't know, my question's very vague. I know, I'm not sure where I'm going, but can you speak to how doing exercises go to addressing people in pain? Because there's also that issue when you have pain, you don't want to do stuff to aggravate it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge question. I think, and I'm going to like kind of rephrase it maybe, and hopefully I have what you're saying accurate here. But essentially you're saying, like, why does exercise help people in pain? Like, what's the mechanism of exercise, you know, to help people in pain? And I think that there's 8 reasons. You can tell that I've lectured on this. I should pull out my sheet. But it will depend on the person's presentation. Sometimes it's really straightforward. Like, if you have let's say you have a tendinopathy. So that means there's like a change in the quality of the tendon, and the tendon is sensitive when you overuse it. Usually, like if it's your Achilles, like hopping and running and things like that.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of Jay Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.